Hi, everyone. I'm Cari Kelemen. Today I have with me Aaron Harris. How are you today, Aaron?
Good, Cari. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely a thrill to talk to you. Your big topic, your big skill set, what you're looking into is something that's on a lot of people's mind, voter fraud. Tell me, how did you get into looking into voter fraud?
Sure. Well, it's kind of funny. This was not my wheelhouse or my issue at all. And then 2 years ago, in May of 2015, I was involved in an election that, to say the least, the outcome was very sketchy or questionable to us. And we started looking into how did we lose the election. We were going through the typical methods, measuring our message to their message and things like that. And we began hearing rumors of voter fraud, honestly, from Democrats and from people in other communities. And so we started going down that road probably about a month or so after the election as we continued to hear these rumors. And what we found was in certain parts, in certain areas, it wasn't just rumors, it was kind of common knowledge. But we just found that nobody had really followed through on figuring out what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was then that I learned about what's called mail-in ballot harvesting. It's now become ballot harvesting or mail-in ballot harvesting in the last 2 years. Is most people had never heard of that. I had never heard of that, but now a lot of people have heard about it, mostly here in Texas because of this most recent municipal election in Dallas County, where it became a very big news story. So we found out about ballot harvesting in 2015. Started investigating it, and basically what we did was we took and ordered all the applications for ballot by mail and copies of the carrier envelope. So when you vote by mail, you apply for a ballot, and then you get the actual ballot and you send it back on what's called a carrier envelope.
Mm-hmm.
And those are public record, and we started requesting those and making copies of them and sorting them by precinct, by voting precinct. And to our knowledge, we haven't met anybody that had ever done that before, putting them in order of the actual voting precinct. And when we did, what we found was the applications overwhelmingly had the same handwriting in different parts of town.
Interesting.
Yeah, right. So we started organizing them and mapping them. We had a big map on the wall, and we started color coding each precinct's handwriting. And where we found handwriting A, we would color code that precinct. And very quickly we noticed that the handwritings, they didn't overlap geographically. And so we found that each canvasser or harvester has their own turf. And so this is how we started learning about mail-in ballot fraud. We spent about a year and a half investigating. This was in Tarrant County, which is Fort Worth, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
We spent about a year and a half investigating that. We documented about 28,000 mail-in ballots in that period, including a couple elections that we can prove were called erroneously due to fraud, and then a lot of other elections where we can't necessarily say that the math would have, we don't know whether or not it would have been called differently, but we know that certain candidates benefited from those operations. And so one of those elected officials was the mayor pro tem of Fort Worth, who, after we went public with this story last October, he decided to not run again and retire and allow somebody else to run in that seat. So that was pretty funny. Since then, we've looked in a total of 4 different counties. We're actually about to go public with our 5th county, and in every county we have looked, we've found it. We have found. Let me back up. We're about to go with our 5th voter fraud or election integrity public information or public announcement. Our 4th vote harvesting. We have a 5th county, which is Hill County. Hill County was not mail-in ballot harvesting. It was a different situation. In that particular election, we found that the official results showed 9,038 ballots cast. The interesting thing is 9,038 ballots cast in the Republican primary election of 2016. That, of course, is the one where you had Trump on the ballot, among other things. We were particularly looking at a state rep race for House District 8 here in Texas between incumbent Byron Cook and a challenger, Thomas McNutt. And what we found is while the official results showed 9,038 votes, we could only find 7,171 voters.
Oh, boy. So,
right.
So more than 2,000 over.
About a little over 1,800 missing voters. And what's interesting about that, though, you got to keep in mind, Cari, is Well, we requested the data for the election 2 days after the primary, which was first week of March. It took them till late May to get us the data. Okay, so you got to keep that in mind. So we didn't really start crunching it until late May, beginning of June. As soon as I opened the file, I saw there was only 7,171 voters in the voter file. Truth be told, I thought they sent us the wrong file. I just said, okay, they didn't give us early votes, or they didn't give us mail-in votes, or something, or there's some precincts missing, something. So before we contacted them, we broke it all down to see what were we missing. Were we missing a precinct? Were we missing mail-in votes? And come to find out, we had all the precincts. We had the mail-in votes. We had the early votes. We had the election day votes. So we did a lot of looking at the data from the left, from the right, every which way we could. I really I didn't think a county could mess up an election that bad, so I figured we did something wrong. After running it by several other people to get their opinion, because I didn't want to embarrass myself, and everybody said, no, you've done it right, I finally called Hill County and said, hey, can you explain this to me? Where are these missing voters? Her response to me was, I don't owe you an answer. And
my gosh,
so,
that is brazen.
Yeah, in the reality, she didn't know the answer, and so we filed a complaint with Secretary of State and Attorney General. And in September, they went in and impounded all the ballots and associated equipment, and that investigation's ongoing. But I point that out to say that Hill County was different than Dallas County, Tarrant County, and we have another one in Harrison County, which is far east Texas, rural Texas. Mm-hmm. And the thing that's interesting about Harrison County is I always want to point it out, because if your listeners are anything like me, you never think that this kind of stuff would happen in a small rural county. You just assume it's the large urban cities, it's the Chicagos, it's the New Orleans, it's the Houstons. Mm-hmm. But Harrison County is a small East Texas rural county, and we found ballot harvesting occurring in their municipal elections and in their primaries in Marshall, Texas. And so there's an ongoing criminal investigation there as well. And we'll be going public with one in Harris County, which is Houston. Here probably in the next month or two, we'll go public with that one. So it's been a wild ride. We've learned a lot. One of the things we've learned is that in Texas, there's nobody whose job it is to look for this stuff. So as we found it and documented it, the AG responds to complaints. They don't go out and look for it. The SOS doesn't go out and look for it. The counties don't look for it. There's no quality controls in place to make sure that these things happen. Yeah. And one other thing I'd like to tell your listeners is the biggest thing I learned when I got into this was how widespread it is and how many cases there are out there. But the media has a very high investment in not talking about these stories. So you and I met in Dallas, and in Dallas in 2010, there was a famous political family named Medrano. He ran for Justice of the Peace, beat the incumbent Sepulveda. The election was contested. The AG ended up prosecuting that. Medrano went to jail. He was convicted for winning that election through mail-in ballot fraud. Most people in Dallas have never heard of that story. Just about 6 weeks ago, we had a Republican constable removed from office in Ellis County, which is adjacent to Dallas to the south, because he won his election. He stole his election using mail-in ballot fraud. He was convicted. About 6 weeks ago, a U.S. postal worker was convicted in the Rio Grande Valley. What he was doing was selling the vote harvesting operators. Every day he was telling them which addresses he delivered a ballot to so they could go to those homes and harvest the ballot. This is a federal worker. It was a federal indictment. He was convicted 5 or 6 weeks ago. Nobody's heard of that story. If you Google it, you'll find it.
Okay, what I want to ask and clarify is, they took the ballot out of the mailbox while the person before the person living at that home had taken it out of their own mailbox, right? So they were actually stealing out of a private citizen's mailbox a ballot that was mailed to them before they got to use it and vote on it and send it back.
Yeah, so let's explain to the listeners how this happens. So in these vote harvesting operations, the harvester will apply for the ballot with the voter never even knowing. So that's your first infraction. Okay. So they'll sit around with a list of voters, and they're using voters over the age of 65 are eligible to receive these in Texas. So they'll just take all the voters over 65. They'll send out an application, and they forge the voter's signature on that application. All right. So then they use different systems. In the case that I just gave you down the valley, they were paying the mailman to tell him which house he delivered a ballot to. In Tarrant County, for example, one of the operations was faxing them in. You were allowed, we just fixed this year legislatively, but up until actually September 1st just now, you were allowed to fax these in. And they were faxing them on Wednesdays because then they knew that Tarrant County would process it Thursday morning. It'd go in Thursday's mail and be in the mailbox of the voter on Friday or Saturday, and they could go get it out of the mailbox. In Dallas County, we have undercover audio of the harvesters talking about how they pay somebody on the inside to tell them which addresses they mailed every day. The bottom line is they use different techniques to know when it's going to be in your mailbox. And this is where the harvesting part comes in. That's why it's called ballot harvesting, because now they go harvest that ballot. So the first case scenario is they're trying to find it yet in your mailbox before you, the voter, have pulled it out of the mailbox. Mm-hmm. If they're able to get it out of your mailbox, they can do a number of different things. We have operations where they have collected people's signatures digitally. So they'll just take that ballot and print your signature on it digitally, and you'll never even know that you voted. Gosh. We have operation. We have, for example, we have voters. We have a voter who the harvester showed up at his door, was trying to get him to vote early. The problem is he lives right in front of the polling location. Right across the street is the school where him and his wife vote. He said, why would I vote by mail? I just walk 60 feet across the street. So finally she says to him, well, will you sign my quote? I get quota for voter engagement, and you're my last one for the day. I want to go.
Oh, no.
And he says, yeah, sure. So she hands him the board. He signs it. And she says, will your wife sign? Sure. She goes, gets his wife. She signs. 2-3 weeks later, they walk across the street to vote, and guess what? They already voted. And when I said, Mr. Gomez, what did you sign? He said, well, it was a yellow form with a lot of black writing on it. Well, for those of you that don't know, the carrier envelope that your ballot goes back in that you sign as a voter is yellow with black writing. He signed his own ballot, his own carrier envelope, and never even knew it.
Oh,
so
gosh.
She harvested that ballot. The other operation we see with that, or kind of twist to that, is sometimes the voter obviously gets their ballot before the harvester shows up. And what they do is they show up at your door and present themselves as doing a service. Right now, D Magazine has a piece on this, and it's a picture of me holding a fruit basket. And the reason for that is in Dallas, there's a infamous now, I guess, group of guys who run what they call Operation Harvest, and they'll show up at these voters' doors with baskets or boxes of fruits and vegetables.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I've had a couple of those.
Oh, have you really?
Oh, yeah. And they actually, they say they're from, fresh from the field or whatever.
Yeah.
But if you look at them, they've got the grocery store tag on them. Like they came and asked to try to sell me grapefruit, and it had the little sticker on the grapefruit. And I'm like, this is not. I'm like, sorry guys, nice try, but.
There you go. Well, so what they'll typically do is show up to deliver the fruits and vegetables, and they'll have some line like, hey, we're just here to help our community. It's normally going to be in Hispanic or African American. Average age of these people is typically over 85 to 95 years old. It's not uncommon for them to be over 100. We had one case with 60 voters. 4 of them were over 100. It's very elderly. So they show up with the fruits. They now come into your house to drop off these fruits and vegetables. And they start talking to you about the community, make sure everybody's good. We're here to serve you. By the way, Cari, don't you remember there's an election going on right now? Mail-in ballots are going out. Have you gotten your mail-in ballot? Why, yes, I just got my ballot today. Excellent. Let me help you with that. And then they'll harvest your ballot. And It typically goes something like, when you open the envelope, there's a lot of stuff in there. There's a thank you letter from the Secretary of State for voting by mail, instructions in English, instructions in Spanish, a security envelope, a carrier envelope, a ballot. So I'll say, oh, it's all very confusing, Ms. Kelemen. Here, you just sign this. We'll take care of your ballot for you. And we get voters who say, oh, yeah, they take care of it for us. They know how I vote.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Now, I've heard of this stuff going on in nursing homes and rest homes and stuff where the people are elderly, and they'll actually go down the hall door to door and ask, do you want us to sign you up for a mail-in ballot?
Right.
Oh,
and you'll get, and it's typically the same person year in, year out that comes out, so they develop a rapport. Mm-hmm. One of my favorites, we actually have a couple of these where the voter says, oh, yeah, she comes by every year, he comes by every year, and he just knows how I vote.
Oh, my gosh.
And we had a girl that was doing interviews. She's Hispanic, and she asked this Hispanic elderly voter, well, how did you vote? And she said, well, I voted for the Democrat. And this particular race was a Democrat versus a Democrat. And she said, well, which Democrat did you vote for? And, of course, the voter had no idea, and the look on their face, it drops, and they're completely confused. And it's like, it's that moment of realization that they don't know who the harvester checked on the ballot for them. So that's the harvesting part. Mm-hmm. They'll harvest it whether they can get it out of your mailbox first or get it in your house. It's easier for them if they can get out of your mailbox and have it on them. Mm-hmm. They have more options that way. We know voters who have signed their carrier envelope under the pretense of petitions. They'll show up and say, the Republicans are trying to take Hispanics or African Americans or senior citizens' right to vote away. Will you sign our petition? People sign the petition, and boom, it's their own carrier envelope, and now their ballot's off, and they don't even know what's on it. So,
do these guys that are selling magazines door to door, are they part of this too?
We haven't found that.
The magazine subscriptions, those are about the only people, other than those and the people that want to paint your curb. The number, your address on your curb. That's about the only people that come to my door anymore at all. Unless there is one other group, the environment group, the recyclers. Oh, really? Yeah, they come by, and I'm just like, guys,
something's going on here.
It just doesn't feel right. Who comes to your door anymore? And right. I just cannot believe people are still letting people into their homes.
Right. It's kind of like the old, we had somebody show up at our house a while back selling vacuum cleaners.
Still?
Who sells vacuum cleaners?
No.
And some of those guys are just out casing homes, right? They're just casing it. But yeah, this is it's unfortunate. And the interesting thing about it is if you look at the statutory requirement is 65 or older. But when you really get down to looking at who's being harvested, it's by and large people over 85.
Wow.
They're taking advantage of the most vulnerable people, most vulnerable citizen population.
Yeah. So it's not like they're going door to door down your street. They actually know who's elderly, and they're cherry picking those.
Correct. They have very good lists. One of the things we see is they're harvesting the same people year in, year out. And it's the same names, the same neighborhoods, the same precincts. And so what really broke this story, so for those listeners who don't know, in the Texas House, we just passed SB 5 in the special session. SB 5 was a great bill. What it did was, for one, there was no definition of mail-in ballot harvesting in the Texas Election Code prior to this. We defined ballot harvesting.
Good.
The vast majority of these things were misdemeanors. So when these guys were caught, the Attorney General would get these guys on a misdemeanor, which equivalent to essentially a traffic ticket, and so they would always plead it out to deferred adjudication, and these guys would pay a $500 fine. But on deferred adjudication, there's no conviction. So the media comes along and says, "Hey, let's see your convictions," and they go, "Well, there's not any, right?"
Oh.
So then they say, "Well, there's no voter fraud." So in that bill, they increased the penalties to state jail felonies or and above. So we now have felonies on these things. We eliminated digital signatures. We eliminated their ability to fax them in, several different things. It was a great bill.
Good.
It's been about 17 years since we've had any kind of massive election reform in Texas. So it was a good bill to pass. But what I was going to say is what changed was the Tarrant County investigation was great, but Dallas really was a game changer. And it was a game changer because for the first time ever, we had the voters come forward and speak. These voters just don't want to go on camera and talk about this stuff. And so back in the spring, the municipal elections in Dallas County, we had a bunch of voters come forward and say, "Hey, I was harvested. Hey, I received a ballot that I didn't apply for." And coupled with that was we had the media cover it for the first time. WFA, which I believe is an ABC affiliate,
Yep.
has run well over a dozen nightly news stories on it. Dallas Morning News, our local paper, I stopped counting at 30 articles on it.
Okay.
And so we got media coverage that we've never received before from mainstream publications.
That's good.
You know, I was telling you, Cari, last night about I started mentioning earlier several cases. The constable in Ellis County, the judge in Dallas County. There was a school board president in Donna ISD, and on New Year's Day of 2012, January 1st, 2012, he hung himself after it became public information he was about to get indicted because he stole his race using mail-in ballot fraud. Down in that same area, there was an indictment in 2012, and 6 people were convicted on felony convictions of mail-in ballot fraud. But these stories, most people have never heard of them. I mean, here's a scandalous story. A school board president hung himself.
Near the border of Texas, down Donna, Texas, down near Brownsville, on the border, school board hangs himself. I mean, that is sensational. If the media won't cover that.
Right. And to this day, if you Google that story, Donna ISD school board president kills himself, you'll find it. But it's a local newspaper, local weekly publication that published the story, and you'll find 1 or 2 others. But you're not going to see ABC or CBS or CNN or anybody covering it, Yeah. And so that's the challenge, is getting the message out, getting the word out. Yeah. We've had in the totality, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of stories right here in Texas. Yeah. I tell people all the time, we could do voter fraud full time and never leave North Texas.
Oh, you would never have to leave Dallas County. I've been a poll watcher. I have seen it with my own eyes. I have witnessed a man go to vote, and the election judge says you've already voted.
Right.
I've seen the reaction on a voter's face going, no, I didn't. And just the panic that ensues from that. I've seen it.
That's right. And the challenge with that is, so a voter shows up at the poll, Cari, and the election judge says you've already voted. So what happens? The problem is those voters don't follow through. First of all, who are they going to follow through with? So one of the beefs that I have here with Tarrant County is they don't keep a track record of those complaint calls. So during election, if the election judge calls elections and says, hey, I have a voter here who says he didn't vote. Yeah. There's no record of that phone call. There's no record of that complaint.
Yeah.
So as a watchdog or say that even the Republican Party or the Democratic Party or anybody, you can't go in after the fact and say, let's see what kind of systematic problems we're having at the voting locations. Yeah. There's no log. Okay.
Yeah.
And so that voter goes away. I have heard literally dozens of stories of voters showing up to be told they've already voted. But there's no way to go back and track that. The biggest mistake is these voters, they get upset. Sometimes they're intimidated by the election judge, so they just kind of say, okay, and go home.
Or they get handed a provisional ballot. And who knows and then whoever knows that those get counted. That's right. There's no paper trail. I mean, it's almost like a hush puppy. Here you go. Here's your provisional. Here's your provisional ballot. Now go away. Right. But there's so much going on, and it's not just Texas. Texas has its own problems, and we can walk down that road. But I want to talk to you nationally just a little bit. Yeah. We have 3 states now that are mail-in ballot only. We have Washington State, we have Oregon, and now we have recently Colorado. These are all mail-in ballots, and right. I heard. Right after the election this last fall, that there was one residence that received multiple mail-in ballots to cast in, like in a box, like a stack of them.
Yes, a whole stack of them on her door. I remember that story.
Right.
Yeah. So, and listen, make no mistake, there is a national push by Democrats to do universal mail-in ballot. There were 3 or 4 bills filed in the Texas House. There's 3 or 4 bills filed by Democrats in the Texas House for universal mail-in ballot.
Well, that makes the case right there that that's their favorite way to steal votes, other than putting them in Al Franken's trunk in Minnesota. Oh look, we found.
You're right. The interesting thing
that's trunk stuffing.
We have one guy in Austin, a prosecutor with the AG's office, who almost solely prosecutes voter fraud. Which, by the way, doesn't exist, but one guy spends full time just prosecuting voter fraud. And he was asked in a committee hearing last September in the Elections Committee, Texas House. He said, asked by Representative Schofield out of Houston, asks, "Is our problem in Texas voter impersonation, meaning somebody showing up at the poll and not having ID and voting as somebody else, or some scenario like that, or is our problem in Texas organized groups using ballot harvesting and stealing entire elections?" And the prosecutor from the AG's office said, without a doubt, it's organized groups stealing entire elections.
Right.
And I have found that to be the case. Our wheelhouse is mail-in ballot fraud. The thing about mail-in ballot fraud is it's very easy to document after the fact. It's very hard to stop beforehand.
Yeah.
And it's nearly impossible to prosecute. I have had conversations with people at district attorney's offices in various counties, as well as attorney general's office, and they have all independently described to me why mail-in ballot fraud is one of the hardest crimes to prosecute. They've even told me it's harder to prosecute than murder, and there's a couple reasons for that. And crimes like DWI or murder or theft, there are literally legal handbooks that tell those prosecutors 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 step process to prosecute that crime. DWI, you get the cop who was there, he testifies, says he was drunk, you have a breathalyzer test, boom, boom, boom. You check off the boxes and you get a conviction. There is no manual for voter fraud because, well, first off, it's not in the legal handbook. Second off, the MOs change. The thing about voter fraud is it's a human intelligence investigation and conviction. You have to get people to talk.
Right. Without
people talking and testifying in court, you will never get a conviction. And up until this new bill, SB 5, which takes effect January 1st, it's been a misdemeanor. So what are you going to prosecute? I mean, you just can't put that kind of investment either in time and in court costs to prosecute a misdemeanor. So it's tough. We changed a couple things this session. Not only did we make things felonies, but during the regular session, I'm really excited. It was actually the Representative Schofield bill. They added organized election fraud to the RICO statute for Texas.
Oh, good.
So now, for the first time ever, not only can we prosecute for felonies, but we can also go up the chain to the guys paying them, to the guys organizing it, making the list. As I said, it's a very targeted list. You have data people, you have consultants, and you have the financiers. And so for the first time ever, hopefully we can go after some of these guys in the future. And it's going to take putting into it.
I certainly hope so. Another thing occurred to me while you were speaking. We have these people that are voting for somebody with these stolen ballots, but isn't it also the case, and I believe I heard of a case around 2010, that year, where things were just chaos, but of red precincts in the Dallas area getting their mail-in ballots just thrown away?
There's a lot of funny business that goes on during election time, right? I ran a race one time where we had 3 different mailers all disappear, and they were staggered in different calendar days, and then somehow they all showed up on voters' doors the day after the election, right? But yes, there's a lot of weird stuff with the mail-in ballots. You have situations where people get their mail-in ballots, days by, and we're not talking about 1 or 2. We're talking about large sections of people getting their mail-in ballots late, their applications being lost, things like that. We have one of the things that the harvesters do is they have steam machines. And so as the harvesters go through the neighborhoods and collect these ballots, the field boss, the ground boss, if you will, he'll use a steam machine, open the envelopes, and if that ballot isn't for the candidate that they're harvesting for, it gets lost. So there's actually a stash house that we're aware of where a lot of these are still are to this day. And so they use a steam machine, open it, check the ballot, close it back up if it's a good one, and discard it if it's a bad one. So there's a lot of funny things. The problem with mail is you're at the mercy of everybody that handles it through the process.
It's true. So if you were a voter, at least in the state of Texas, because I know every state is different, but if you were a voter in Texas, how would you advise someone who wants their vote to count to vote? Would you vote during early voting? Would you wait until election day and vote in your own precinct? What would you do?
I'm a big advocate of voting on election day in your precinct on paper. And so go in, ask for a paper ballot. Most of Texas, you have an option of electronic or paper on election day. In a lot of our counties, in early voting, you can only vote electronically.
Yes.
And so on election day, you have an option of either ask for a paper ballot and place it yourself into that ballot scanner. That's the safest way to vote.
Right. Okay. And still, even if you do that,
right.
who carries that scanner from that precinct to the Dallas County, wherever the
election?
Yeah,
That's
Dallas County elections. Who actually transports it? Because as poll watcher, you can watch all day long at the polling place during early voting or whatever, but then the election judge and the clerk, if they're of the opposite party, they'll go, "Thank you so much for your time today. See you tomorrow." And then they take that day's votes and put it in their car, you know, and you don't know what they do with it. You don't know if they went home. You don't know if they changed it. You don't know if they went straight to Board of Elections. You don't know where they went.
That's right.
So poll watching ends at the door, but the judge and the clerks still have access to that. And so unless they're trustworthy, I'm just saying that the ability as a citizen to feel like my vote counts is just so severely jeopardized at this point. People get very, it's let me tell you something. This is a passionate issue for so many people, myself included, because if you're one of those people that has worked on a campaign and you've put the blood, sweat, and tears into going door to door to door and really working for every single vote, and somebody can come along and just nullify it, all of your work, it's just, you get to a point where you go, why is this worth it?
Right.
So we can't be there as a nation. We can't be there as a county. We can't be there as a state. We have got to have some kind of confidence that whoever's counting the votes is doing so with integrity. So how, in your mind, Aaron, you've looked at this, how in your mind do we get there? If you had your druthers, how would voting be run?
Well, so that's a really complex issue, and I'll try to simplify it without getting into all the details there. But I'll say two things. First off, I'm a big fan of having poll watchers there, and a lot of times people can't, because election day, early voting, it's a 12-hour day of polls open. Then once you close, you have another hour and a half, sometimes longer, to balance all the tapes and count everything out, et cetera, right? What I am a big fan of is having somebody there. If you can't be there all day, then go for the last 4 hours and stay there for the count. Okay. So you're right. While you can't get in that car necessarily and ride with the election judge to Dallas County or Tarrant County or whatever county elections, you can be there for the tally and for the final counts, and you can record those numbers yourself so that you can, after the fact, go, hey, wait a second, that precinct's count was 100 to 200. You're now saying it was 300 to 0. So you can be there for that. That's very important. But larger than that, we have to have structural things in place that help us avoid malfeasance at the local level. So one of the things we're moving towards is what I call ballot assist. Some people call it hybrid systems, whatever you want. They're not perfect, but they're better, in my opinion, than what we have now. And what that is right now we have what's called DREs, direct recording electronic voting machines, right? Electronic voting machines. My joke is always, if you vote electronically, did you actually vote at all, right? And so with the new machines, Denton County actually just went completely to these. We have 20 or 30 counties now on these. We tested them in 3 counties last cycle. And what they do is you vote electronically on an electronic head, but when you get to that last screen where it shows you your ballot and you want to confirm your ballot, it actually prints that off for you.
Good.
And then you go cast that into the ballot scanner. Okay.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying.
And so you now have the electronic machine has the automatic count that you always want, right? It can get transmitted back to elections or stored on a hard drive. But then you also have this paper ballot stored over here that if you have to have a recount, you have that paper ballot
paper trail.
Recount.
Receipt.
Right.
Yeah, because there's been up to now no receipt. You confirm your ballot and it goes into the ether somewhere, and you have nothing you can take with you. So that would be a big improvement. The other big improvement for us in Texas is this long early voting period.
That's right.
And the problem I see with that, Aaron, is that it's difficult to find people to become poll watchers, to work as clerks and judges,
right.
because it's 2 weeks plus 3 weekends. Who can do that except the elderly and the retired? And those are the people that they're harvesting votes from, and now they're the poll watchers and the clerks, and I'm not trying to knock elderly people, but I'm in these polling places where I'm watching these people. You could run rings around them, and they don't think like criminals. They're just nice people, and they just expect everybody to do their best. And I just feel like there's so many little counties like Harrisburg, these little sweet East Texas counties, where these little poll watcher people are just getting run circles around by the criminals.
That's right. Well, it's a human resource nightmare to have it's a week and a half, almost 2 weeks of early voting, and then election day. Yeah. From a logistics perspective, you just can't staff enough people, especially in these bigger counties like Dallas and Tarrant and Harris, where you might have, if you have a countywide, let's say you have a countywide judge running for judge in Dallas County or Tarrant County. In Tarrant County, you're looking at nearly 500 polling locations on election day. You're looking at, I can't remember what our early voting is, something like 200 locations. You're talking about manning 200 locations for 2 weeks every day for 12 hours. You can't do it. And so the extended early voting really benefits incumbents. It really benefits the machine, whoever the machine is in that county. And so, that's a problem. Not every state has it the way we do. Personally, I would advocate, and I don't know what the reality of getting this done politically would be. I would advocate for a super weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, 12 hours a day, 3 days. Be there, be square, and get it over with. I think we could get, whether it be grassroots, establishment, everybody could staff their teams for 3 hard days.
Yeah.
Talking, if it's a 12-hour poll day, it's a 14, 15-hour work day. Staff it for 3, get it knocked out, and be done with it.
I think that's fantastic. I've also heard this. Make Election Day a national holiday. Everybody votes on the same day, and another big reason for that is because then everybody's voting with the same amount of information. Remember, voting had already started. Voting had already started in October here in Texas when Comey decides, to reopen the FBI case, against Hillary Clinton. And so we all need the same amount of information going into those polls. That makes it fair, more fair.
That's right. That's true of mail-in ballots and early votes versus election. And you see that a lot, right? Here in Texas, we have a break between early voting and election day of 3 days. And those 3 days are just chaotic. And a lot of those 3 days, a lot of times, that's when they drop these sensationalistic accusatory emails or direct mails, and you'll get a flyer that says, my opponent was born of alien style, whatever. But you'll see significant voter behavior change from early voting to election day. And those voters voting on election day are voting with a different set of information than the voters in early voting. Is that right? You bring up the Comey thing. It's interesting. When that happened, I actually learned something that I didn't know, and that is some of the other states. In Texas, we have what we call secret ballot, meaning there's no identifier connecting the ballot to the voter. You can never connect those two once cast. Well, that's not true of everywhere. I believe it was South Carolina and one or two others where there were voters going in after Comey did that pulled that whole stunt and retracting their ballot because they're tied and changing their ballot, which I found fascinating. I don't know how that works logistically, what the mechanics of that are, but they were actually going in and changing their ballot. So if you have a scenario where these voters are going back and forth based upon daily information, we should all be voting with the same amount of information. The challenge with the idea of making it a national holiday is that only addresses our presidential election. And we have 3 types of elections, right?
Right.
We have primaries, we have our municipal elections, and we have general elections where every 4 years is a presidential. The challenge is, in most areas, that is the least meaningful election. And bear with me. And why do I say that? Because most of our districts are gerrymandered. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. It just is. Most districts are either Republican or they're Democrat. To give you an example, we have 181 Senate and House districts in Texas. Texas Tribune did analysis, and they said only 9 of those are actually competitive in November.
My goodness.
2 or 3 of those are in Dallas County, and the rest are in Harris and down the valley. So you're in the hotbed. Like in Tarrant County, none of ours are competitive in November. We have 8 Republican and 3 Democrat districts, and you're not going to win. November doesn't matter. The election that matters is the primary. Whoever wins the Democratic primary in a Democrat district will be the next state rep or next state senator. Whoever wins the Republican primary in a Republican district will win in November. The municipal elections, of course, are so important. That's where our city council and school board races are. And most people miss the reality that a lot of what the federal government, state government do is allocate funds that just get drawn down to the local level, and they're actually spent at the local level. And it is those elections that we see the most voter fraud. And people ask me, why is that? And it's real simple. It's because of graft. That is where, for Texas, 52% of our state budget is education. 60% of our local taxes go to education. It's the biggest piece of all government in Texas. It's the largest employer in Texas. You go down the line. And so there's so much graft there. We, in Texas, we're proud we spend $70 million on high school football stadiums. And so that is where a lot of this voter fraud and whatnot happens. It's not an ideological issue. It's a graft issue. So we have to look at all of our elections. We have the primaries, the municipals, and then the general. By the time we get to the general, in most of these districts, the outcome's already been determined by the district being drawn Republican or Democrat.
Yeah. Well, I gotcha. I appreciate what you do. You are working for an organization called what?
Direct Action Texas. So Direct Action Texas, I'm the executive director of it. We focus. It's kind of funny. We now focus exclusively on investigative work in government malfeasance, election fraud, and things related to that. Like I said, so we found this election fraud by accident in 2015, and then we found that it's driven by graft. And so we said, we need to tackle this one. You have to expose and tackle this one. And so those are the types of stories and things we work on. We're working on right now a story that is really interesting. We have about $70 million allegedly. We're still trying to nail down those numbers between Dallas County and Tarrant County going into a software company that's chaired by one of our county judges, the chairman of the board of the company, one of our county judges. This is going to be an interesting story. And so those are the types of investigations that we work on and try to get these things moved forward. But honestly, we could do election fraud full time and never.
Okay. There's one other thing you said that just horrified me. You said that there is nobody that's looking into this. You're looking into this. Direct Action Texas is a nonprofit, I guess.
Yeah, we're a 501c4.
Okay, so you're a 501c4 and you're doing this. Do other states have something similar? I mean, is it just upon the citizens to organize these and hold the government accountable? Is that it?
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, it is. It's funny. We've had this discussion with people in government and both elected officials as well as bureaucrats about, given the magnitude of the voter fraud in Texas. And by the way, the media will tell you there's no voter fraud. You know who doesn't tell you there's no voter fraud? Anybody on the election committee in the Texas House, including the Democrats, okay? Anybody in the AG's office and law enforcement, the DA's office, etc. So we've had conversations with the AG's office, with state reps and senators and DAs and along the lines of, what do we do about this? Should we set up a government agency that just looks into this? Should we try to get foundations and whatnot to fund a private organization to do this? And the reality is both have pros and cons. There's things that I can do that a government agency would not be able to, and vice versa. So I would like to see some more resources at the state level for this type of thing. We need it. At minimum, I would like to see some of these things given to someone as their responsibility. Like what I said, there's nobody whose job certain things are. I'd like to see these jobs given to either the SOS or the AG's office or some other idea there. But I think that the private sector, the watchdog sector, if you will, has to step up our game. I'll tell you this, the left is very good at coming after the right in coming after with litigation and aggressive media attacks and very intentional and strategic litigation to shut down everything we do. It's time for us to do the same. Nationally, the left has set up, everybody's kind of familiar with Media Matters, but there's a whole umbrella there. One of the organizations that works with Media Matters is called CREW, and they're set up in D.C. to go after the Trump administration for conflicts of interest and ethics violation and use litigation to shut them down.
Yeah.
And so it's time that we on the right do the same. I think we have the facts and the law on our side, and we need to go after these malfeasance, these bad actors, where they're breaking the Texas Purchasing Act, which is a fancy word of corruption, right? Where they're doing election fraud and all these different things, where there's cronyism, where there's lack of transparency, and we need to use both civil and criminal litigation to put an end to these things.
Yeah. Well, one of their tactics too, Aaron, is they don't even necessarily go after the conviction. They just charge. It's like throwing a handful of sand in the gears, and then our side has to scramble to defend it. Maybe we could use that same tactic and just charge, and just let them defend all of this stuff.
The difference is they have free media on their side.
That's
so
true.
If they go out and throw out an accusation, one of the accusations against me is Aaron Harris is racist. So the Hispanic Council of North Texas has filed
Of course you are.
That's right. They filed a complaint with the Department of Justice against me. They offered a $25,000 reward for my arrest for intimidating voters, all these different things. Okay, so all they have to do is they held a little press conference in a park, and all the media was there. Right? And all the media was there to cover how Direct Action Texas Aaron Harris is racist. If I try to do the same, do you know how much media will be there? Zero, right? So the challenge with what you're talking about, I agree 100%. We need to charge these guys. We need to go out and just tell people what they are, but nobody's going to cover it. So our challenge in doing that is we have to buy that exposure or somehow get platforms to cover that.
Well, I'm helping. I'm trying anyway I can. I've got a Twitter account and I've got Skype. So watch out, we're coming after you. But what you're doing, Aaron, I can't thank you enough, because this is one man, one vote. That is, people have fought and died for this. We've had American blood spilt for this right, and we don't take it. I don't take voting lightly, and I don't take somebody trying to steal or harvest votes lightly either. So this is a hill to die on. It really is. This is the fight right here.
Well, I appreciate that. In that same hearing last September in the Elections Committee, the prosecutor said, if democracy stands for one person, one vote, then vote harvesting stands for one person, 100 votes. Dallas County recently arrested a gentleman who they documented harvesting 766 votes in the May election. The crazy thing is he's our fifth most prolific harvester that we've identified. We have some guys that do much more than him. So in his case, it's one person, 766 votes. Yeah. Not according to Aaron Harris, according to the Dallas District Attorney.
Yeah, and so if you're a candidate and you're knocking on doors, he's just erased,
766 of your votes.
And that's not easy.
No.
That is not easy to overcome. So anyway, you're doing the Lord's work. I appreciate your time with me. If you've got any updates, let me know. And I'm going to put your contact information in the box below the video so that people can look at your website or contact you as they wish. And
perfect.
Keep on keeping on.
Cari, I appreciate it. It's been great.
It's been great. Thank you so much, Aaron.
Thanks.